You're driving home, and suddenly it hits you. That thing you said at dinner, the story you told, the detail you didn't need to share. Your stomach drops, your face gets hot, and a voice inside you whispers, "Why did I say that?" You do this. At parties, on first dates, in work meetings, in a message to someone you barely know. You open your mouth, and something inside you starts talking, and you can't stop it. By the time you realize what's happening, it's already out. That's not a lack of self-control, it's not a personality flaw, and it's not because you're too much. There's a part of you that learned, long before you had words for it, that the only way to be safe was to be seen. And right now, that part is still running the show. By the end of this video, you'll understand why your body does this, which part of you is driving it, and 3 specific practices backed by research that can interrupt the pattern without silencing who you actually are. Most advice will tell you to just stop talking. That's like telling someone with a fever to just stop being hot. We're going deeper. We live in a culture that rewards oversharing. Social media calls it being authentic. LinkedIn calls it thought leadership. Instagram calls it showing up. Your therapist might even call it progress. You get likes for your vulnerability. You get followers for your trauma. The more personal you go, the more engagement you get. And somewhere along the way, you stopped being able to tell the difference between connection and performance. But here's what nobody says out loud. The people who applaud your openness online are the same people who feel uncomfortable when you do it in person. The rules changed, and no one told you. So you grew up hearing 2 impossible instructions at the same time. Be yourself, be open, be real. And also, that was too much. Why did you say that? Read the room. And now you live in the space between those 2 commands, never sure if you said too little or too much. Never sure if you were brave or embarrassing. The self-help industry will sell you a communication course, a boundary workshop, a practice that sounds good on paper. But none of that will work until you understand what's actually happening inside you when the words start pouring out. That's what this video is for. What I'm about to share comes from 3 fields that rarely talk to each other: the psychology of what we hide, the science of how the body stores it, and a kind of therapy that doesn't ask why do you do this, but who inside you is doing it. When you put these 3 together, oversharing stops looking like a flaw and starts looking like a message. Let me show you what I mean. Let me tell you about Nadia. It's a Tuesday evening, and Nadia is sitting in a restaurant across from a man she's been on 2 dates with. He asks about her family, a normal question. And before she can think, she's telling him about her parents' divorce, then about her mother's depression, then about the year she spent sleeping on her aunt's couch. His fork stops moving. She sees his eyes shift, and somewhere in her chest, a door slams shut. She smiles. "Sorry, that was a lot." He says, "No, it's fine." But the air between them has changed. She can feel it. She always can. But only after. At work, it's the same. In a team meeting last month, her manager asked how she was adjusting to the new role. Nadia meant to say great, settling in. Instead, she heard herself talking about imposter syndrome, about the anxiety she gets before presentations, about the time she almost quit her last job. Her colleagues smiled politely. One of them glanced at their phone. That tiny movement, eyes dropping from her to the screen for just half a second, landed somewhere in her stomach like a stone. Her jaw ached that night. She didn't know why until she realized she'd been clenching it since the meeting ended. Oversharing isn't about being talkative. Nadia can sit quietly through an entire dinner. The pattern isn't volume, it's calibration. It's saying something too intimate for the level of trust that exists, too raw for the context, too charged for the room. And every time it happens, the engine underneath is the same, a nervous system that learned, very early, that words are the only thing standing between her and disappearing. And then there's her best friend, Leah. They're having coffee when Nadia mentions the date, the one where she told him about her parents within the first 20 minutes. Leah stirs her cup and says carefully, "Nadia, can I say something?" When someone you just met asks about your life, You don't have to hand them everything. You can just give them a piece. Save the rest for the people who've earned it. Leah means well, Nadia knows that, but something in her ribcage folds inward, and she can't figure out why such gentle words feel like being told she's too much. She nods. She changes the subject, and she replays the conversation in her head for 3 days. It's those 3 days that finally bring her to a therapist's office. Not the date, not the meeting, Leah. Because of the person who knows her best is telling her to hold back, maybe the problem is bigger than she thought. Her therapist doesn't respond the way Nadia expects. She doesn't say, "Let's work on boundaries," or "Try pausing before you speak." Instead, she says something strange. Where in your body do you feel the urge to share right before it happens? Nadia thinks about it. My chest, she says. It's like pressure. Like if I don't say it, I'll burst. How old does that pressure feel? Nadia opens her mouth. Nothing comes out. She shakes her head. I don't know. They move on. But that night, lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, the answer arrives uninvited. Not as a thought, as an image. She's sitting on the stairs. She's small. Downstairs, her parents are yelling. No one knows she's there. No one has asked about her day, her school, her anything. She's invisible. And then she walks into the kitchen and says something, she can't remember what. And for one moment, they both stop and look at her. 8. She was 8. And all at once the pattern makes sense. Words were never communication. They were an emergency signal. The only tool a small girl had to make herself exist in a room full of people who'd forgotten she was there. The part of Nadia that overshares isn't the adult. It's that girl on the stairs, still sending emergency signals in rooms where the emergency ended a long time ago. Nadia's pattern started on the stairs, but not every pattern starts there. Maybe your home was fine. Maybe your parents saw you, heard you, loved you, but the schoolyard didn't, or the friend group didn't, or you moved to a new city where nobody knew your name, and something inside you decided, if they won't notice me, I'll make them. Sometimes oversharing doesn't look like vulnerability at all. It looks like volume. Talking louder than the room requires, saying something deliberately provocative, not because you believe it, but because shock is the fastest shortcut to being looked at. Dropping a detail so personal, so out of context, that the whole table turns toward you. For a moment, you exist. And sometimes it's subtler. It's the person who turns every conversation into a story about themselves. Not out of narcissism, out of a quiet terror that if they stop talking, the room will forget they're in it. The origin is different. The engine is the same. A body that learned somewhere along the way that invisibility is dangerous, and words, loud ones, raw ones, shocking ones, are the fastest way to become visible again. So wherever your version started, at home, at school, in a relationship, in a country you moved to at 19, what matters is this. You're not doing it because you're broken. You're doing it because a part of you is still solving a problem that may no longer exist. Nadia's story isn't over. She's still learning. But what she found, and what you can start finding tonight, are 3 things that change the pattern. Not by silencing you, by giving the adult back the microphone. The first one is the simplest, and it works because of how the brain is wired. When you silently name what you're feeling, not out loud, just to yourself, your brain's alarm center actually calms down, measurably. The act of naming an emotion loosens its grip. So the next time you feel that pressure building, the chest tightening, the words lining up, don't try to stop it. Just name it, silently. I'm feeling anxious, or I want to be seen right now, or I'm afraid of the silence. 5 seconds. That's all it takes to create a gap between the feeling and the flood. And in that gap, you get to choose. Once you have that gap, there's a second thing to notice. Think about it this way. If you're about to tell someone about your darkest moment and the most personal thing they've shared with you is where they went on holiday, something's off. You didn't overshare because you're broken. You shared at level 10 with someone who was at level 2. Before you share something personal, ask one silent question. Where are we? Not the location, the trust level. If it feels one-sided, it probably is. You don't have to calculate every sentence, just notice the balance. That girl inside you deserves better than pouring her heart out to someone who hasn't earned the right to hold it. And when the pressure still comes, and it will, there's one more thing worth knowing. The chemical lifespan of any emotion in the body is roughly 90 seconds. After that, what keeps the feeling alive is the story you attach to it. That "if I don't say it, I'll burst" sensation, it has an expiration date. The next time it hits, don't speak, don't fight it either, just ride it. Notice where it lives. Chest, throat, stomach. Watch it peak. It will feel unbearable for about 45 seconds, and then something shifts. The urgency softens. What's left is a choice, not a compulsion. And if after 90 seconds you still want to share, share. But now it's a decision, and that's the difference between vulnerability and survival. None of these ask you to become a different person. None of them ask you to be quiet or smaller, or to perform some polished version of yourself. They ask one thing, that the adult decides what to say, not the girl on the stairs. What you've been carrying isn't a flaw. It's an old signal, a system your body built when you were too small to build anything better. You didn't learn to overshare because you're weak. You learned it because once it was the only way to survive. Understanding that doesn't make the pattern disappear, but it changes the relationship. You stop being the person who always says too much, and you start being the person who finally understands why. Thank you for being here. If this is the kind of depth you've been looking for, subscribe. There's more to explore, and we are just getting started.